Okay, Commissioner Gage Watts, we're live now.
Yes, sir. Mr. Clerk. All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
All right. I call this Juvenile Justice Committee meeting to order. Mr. Clerk, if you would, could we have roll call at this time?
Absolutely. Commissioner Gage Watts.
Present.
Commissioner Taliaferro.
Here, sir.
Commissioner Burrell.
It's dark.
There he is. And Commissioner Young.
Here.
And Commissioner Chavez.
Here, sir.
All right, we've got 5 out of 5 present.
Thank you. We have a quorum. At
We
this
do.
time, we'll have our invocation by Commissioner Taliaferro, and we'll have our Pledge of Allegiance by Dr. Wilson.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we love you and we come to you with thanksgiving because this is the season that we give back to you for your kingdom, all the many blessings that you have given us. But help us to be mindful, O Lord, that sometimes we forget the needs of others. And I, for one, would like to be more mindful of those needs of others and those less fortunate than myself. Heavenly Father, we come to you in humble thanksgiving again, and bless those who could not be with us today. Bless Todd in the hospital for a speedy recovery, and those around the globe who are protecting our freedom. We ask this in your precious holy name, your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Please join me in saying the pledge by written the proper salutation, hand over hearts for the non-military, and brow salute for the military. Let's begin the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Dr.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Wilson.
All right. You want me to move forward with agenda additions?
Yes, sir.
Great. Are you, unless you're aware of any additional agenda additions, the only thing that I have is the motion to approve consideration of items under Louisiana Revised Statutes 4271.
That was moved by Commissioner Burrell. That'll be second by the chair. And I do not have any additional agenda additions.
Great. Then let's see. So I suppose on that motion,
is there any in opposition? That passes by acclamation.
okay. Well, actually, I think we need to do a roll call vote on it real quick. If I could, Commissioner Gage Watts?
Yes.
Commissioner Taliaferro?
Yes.
Commissioner Burrell?
Yes.
Commissioner Young?
Yes.
And Commissioner Chavez?
Yes.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you for that. And also at this point on your agenda is the attached teleconference meeting certification. No action is required there. And that brings us to public comments. We have not received any electronic public comments for today's meeting, but the phone lines are open. Would you like me to go ahead and give that number out?
Yes, please.
Great, that number is 318-226-6596. Again, that's 318-226-6596. Doesn't appear like we're getting any callers. Would you like us to go ahead and move on?
Yes, please.
Okay, that brings us to new business, where the only item we have on our agenda today is the discussion relative to the Raise the Age Act.
Thank you so much. And Director Clay Walker is on. And Director Walker?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Hello.
Thank you. Hello.
At our last meeting, we were hopeful that the city of Shreveport jail could be a solution for our capacity issue, the challenges that we've been facing at the juvenile detention center. And unfortunately, that space will not be able to accommodate the state and federal regulations. If you would you give us an update on the current status as where we are at capacity, the normal length of stay for housing juveniles at the detention center, and where we are with waiver applications?
So where we are in terms of detention, as you said, we did with facilities looked into the Shreveport City Jail, and that did not pan out. We are maintaining, I think, about 19 kids right now. You all may have heard 4 of them are now transfer kids. So when a child as young as 14, but generally 15 or older, is charged with something like murder or armed robbery, they can be transferred to adult court where they are tried as an adult, and historically have stayed at CCC. There is a new law that says that those children tried as adults should be spending the night in juvenile detention. And so we now have 4 of those children in our detention center that are being tried as adults. The reason that's really critical is our average length of stay is roughly 10 days for our juveniles. With those 4, it is going to be much, much longer. One of those children has been there roughly 340 days, and they will likely be there. So the 2 triggers to have them leave, one would be to be convicted in adult court, and the other is to turn 18. We have 2 of them and they're 17. So when they turn 18, they would go to CCC. The others are 15 and will be with us for quite some time. I would think roughly a year to a year and a half until they're tried. And so that's the new challenge for us, is we have 19 children in, but 4 of them are these adult children that'll be staying much, much longer. And in effect, that means that for our judges, they're working with 20 beds rather than 24 for our juvenile population. We are, however, maintaining below 24. I think this year we have gotten to capacity and over on 6 days out of the year so far of 2020 that we've been over 24 and had to deal with that. In terms of the waiver, there's some history to this. To kind of catch everybody up to speed, in 2013, the Supreme Court and, in fact, a legislative task force put together the Juvenile Detention Center standards that went into effect on July 1st, 2013. And those standards established, as it sounds, they established the standards for running a juvenile detention center. We are licensed by the Department of Children and Family Services. And so they come by and audit us, and that's how we maintain our license. Under those standards, it dictates the size of a cell that would be required to have more than 1 child. And so, in effect, what happened to us was on July 1st, 2013, the Supreme Court said that we can only keep 1 child per cell because they're too small. We did seek waivers on a few issues. You could essentially, the waiver is the idea of being grandfathered in. For example, I think Jefferson Parish had a waiver. Part of their detention center, the ceilings were too low. But the issue would be, you wouldn't force them to spend $2 million to raise their ceiling for something that was, somewhat inconsequential. In our facility, it was our beds. Our beds in the cells, you may remember just from the tours you've been on, our beds are essentially concrete slabs. And the detention center standards call for standalone beds. And we actually sought that waiver. Number one, just the cost of redoing the beds would be too expensive. But also, I actually felt like our concrete slabs are safer. A standalone bed, unfortunately, you can wrap something around and get leverage enough to attempt suicide from that bed. So I disagreed with that standard, and we sought a waiver on the beds, and we were in fact granted that waiver. So we have just kept our concrete slab beds. At the time, 2012, building up 2013, we met as a staff with the court back then, the judges, and discussed the idea of the cell size. We did not seek a waiver for the cell size to allow for 2 children, really for a couple of reasons. Number one was safety of the children, that when you double bunk, you have 48 children, you then have 16 per pod. So there's safety issues. When we reduced to 24 beds on that July 1st, incidents of violence in the detention center, that's youth on youth or youth on staff violence, went down by 60%. So part of it was safety for the staff and for the children. There's another unfortunate part of that which is sexual assault. When you have double bunking, even with safety measures, with 15-minute checks, with random checks, with all of the cameras that are allowed by law, we were still having sexual assaults, and many of the detention centers across the state do. By single bunking, we can guarantee there are no sexual assaults. So that's also obviously a safety measure for the children. It's also a liability issue for the parish. And then finally, really, maybe the primary reason was the finances of it. The detention center standards on that July 1st, 2013 mandated that we have a ratio of staff during the day of 1 to 8, 1 adult for 8 children. And so if we double bunk in effect and we add that, we would have to virtually double our staff. And so that too, almost along the same lines of adding a pod, it really comes down to the finances of it, that we don't have the recurring budget to hire that many staff. So back at that time with the judges, with DCFS, we went through this discussion and decided that we would not double bunk. We had been at that point 2 years maintaining under 24. And since then, the 7 years that have passed, we roughly, I think I was going through this data a few days ago. This year, we've had 6 days over 24. Last year, I believe we had 7. The year before that was 13. So generally speaking, the judges and the staff working together have been able to maintain at or under 24 for obviously a significant majority of the year. But that's the history essentially of waivers and the size of the cells. A lot of it comes back to the finances of the staff. If we were to add a pod, we need to add staff. If we were to double bunk, we would need to add staff. Plus you have the safety and liability issues. That's kind of the backstory to it. But, obviously open to any kind of discussion and other ideas that people have. But that's
Okay.
the backstory on it.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is that the actual waiver has been available since 2013. It's
Yes, ma'am.
just okay. So this is not a new initiative, as previously stated. This is an issue, an initiative that has been available, but it has not been utilized because there is a risk of sexual assault. There is a higher challenge with the youth and staff of them being assaulted as well. The violence on youth went down 60%. Did I hear you say that?
That is correct.
Yes.
And also, this is a financial issue because of the reoccurring budget that we will have to be responsible for as well. How many additional staff will we need, or would we have to use the entire waiver? Or is there an opportunity to use a partial waiver?
I don't know that I've put in a call down to DCFS because I had that same thought, Commissioner, about possibly a single pod. As far as I know, and the folks that I've talked to, when you seek the waiver to double bunk, it would apply to all of the beds. I mean, I think we might be able to limit that ourselves, I guess, just internally. But if you seek the waiver, you're seeking it for all of the beds. Yeah. In terms of how many staff, That's an internal conversation. Since this came up, we're discussing that. But I know by law we have to have the 1-to-8 ratio. So if we doubled in each pod that we doubled, you'd have to add an additional staff during the day. It's 1-to-16 at night, and so you should be okay at night. But on the additional staff, the only reason I'm hesitating to say it may be more than double is because when we had double bunking, when we had 48 available beds, we also had mace. We also had a better way, frankly, to protect the staff and protect other children. If a major fight broke out, 5-on-4 or something, you had mace to kind of quell that uprising. Also on July 1st, 2013, the detention center standards removed all weaponry. As you know, we run juvenile detention with verbal de-escalation. And so my concern would be going back to that number, 16 people, 16 youth in one pod with 2 adults without mace is different even than it was back then. I might consider that you would need, it could be something like 2 per pod and another floater. It could be 3 per pod. It's something in that nature in terms of safety. That's something we're looking into and discussing as a staff. I'll also just point out, I mean, my other concern when I brought this to the staff to discuss, we struggle, and I'd have to look back at this. I think we've been fully staffed probably 1 month out of the last 5 years. We struggle continuously, as does OJJ with their facilities, to sustain staff. It's a difficult job, as you can imagine. Not everybody's made out for it, and a lot of people burn out on it after a year or two. So maintaining the staff we have now of roughly 40 to 45 people is difficult. The idea of trying to maintain 60, 65 would be very difficult at any rate. But
Absolutely. I
that
think
number
are very valid, serious concerns that I'm listening to, and especially with having 4 now that will be with us for quite some time, as you stated, of
Yes.
those 19 that are there, and definitely not being able to use some of the alternative measures that you were able to in the past. These are not like non-secure safety holes. I mean, these are serious offenses.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
I think that this is a conversation that we'll have to have when you have some more, I think, solid information on exactly how this waiver would be applied to the facility. Because I don't think that it may not be advantageous for us to jump ahead of ourselves to apply for something that we don't know all of the guidelines about. I think that it may pose more challenges than it would do us justice at this moment. And I'm open to hear from some of the other commissioners as well, and listen at their thoughts for it. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to put a pause in there right there because it's just some of the thoughts that I'm hearing about it and with the capacity of where we are.
Commissioner Gage Watts.
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am. My concern on this subject was expressed very well by Clay also, but I want to also point out back in 2005, we went through this anti-KC initiative to reduce the number of folks being incarcerated, children being incarcerated within a detention center. At one time, we had 56 a day.
Right.
At the height prior to the initiative. But since that time, we have done a great job turning that around to have the numbers we currently have, to the point that we are a model site for the nation on the Anna-Casey Foundation initiative. So I would hate for us to go backwards in our attempts to minimize the detention for kids. And I understand there are certain variables we can't control, but certainly we have done a yeoman job in reducing that population and having only those kids in there that pose a public safety risk. So I think that needs to still be our guiding principle, not to lose sight of what we've been able to gain thus far.
Absolutely.
Point of clarification.
Commissioner Burrell.
Yeah, Dr. Wilson, you said 56 a day, 56 what, students? I mean,
Yeah, at the height of our operation prior to us undertaking the anti-KC initiative, we had as many as 56 children a day in the center,
Hmm.
being to 10.
and
So
now it's down to 24.
yes, sir, and hovering even lower than that. We've had some as much as 15, kids. It had proven to be very successful in our
What is
attempt.
what has changed? Just policy?
Yes, sir. Raise the age is now adding some variables that we hadn't anticipate, and now thus it will definitely impact us in more so an adverse way because of the capacity issue. But prior to raise the age, we've been doing pretty good with maintaining low numbers. And I know
So,
this. Go ahead.
so the policy change allowed us to reduce it down to right now 24, but the cost just escalated, just increased.
Yes, sir. With the Raise the Age Act, did bring any resources and didn't take into account capacity issues that we have, and
Mhm.
it has added some challenges and strain to us being able to stay well within our limits of the number of bed space we have. But prior to that, the initiative itself proved to be very effective to the point that they have used us as a model site for other 8 communities throughout the United States that want to do the same thing.
But as the cost per pupil increase,
Overtime expenses does go up proportionally because you have those things that would go up. But I think we had, if you put it side by side, we would have saved a significant amount of money versus having 56 children in the facility versus what we currently have. So we
okay.
managed to save a lot of money in doing the initiative.
So if we reduce it down to, due to policy, we reduce it down to now 24, we were able to take advantage of savings, or did that sort of washed because of the increase in cost due to inflation and other things?
Yes, sir. The initial onset wasn't about saving money. It was, frankly, we were detaining too many children in the center. So as an alternative to incarceration, we look for other community-based initiatives to help, uh, uh, to help, I guess, pay their penance to society for ill that they have done,
Hmm.
and also not create an environment that we turning out children that will pick up bad habits from others that may come in their interaction.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Were you done, Dr. Wilson, also?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Director Walker, I wanted to ask you also, are any of the juveniles that are detained at this time, are any of those from other parishes?
No, ma'am. We do occasionally have, the way that the Office of Juvenile Justice works, the Rutherford House, one of our local group homes, will be holding children from other parishes. And if they are here in Caddo at the Rutherford House, and they either commit a crime there or escape and commit a crime, they're picked up in Caddo, and short term they are held in our detention center until they go back to OJJ custody. So we will occasionally have an out of parish child that really has more to do with them staying at the Rutherford House, that sort of thing. But by and large, that's really not part of our population problem. As of right now, we do not.
Okay.
But we may have over the course of the year an occasional child.
Point of information.
Yes, sir.
In terms of the Rutherford House, I'm very, very familiar with that when it started. Do we have other facilities other than the Rutherford House that does pretty much the same thing?
As of right now, I'm trying to think out loud a little bit. There are several in the nearby area. There's another over in Monroe, Methodist Group Home. We do have some local organizations. Of course, the Brandon House. The Brandon House is holding children kind of on the re-entry end after they have gone to juvenile prison and they're now stepping down back into society. They'll go to the Brandon House before they go home. We have a couple of other local agencies. RCC is one for girls. The Restoration Crisis Center is for girls.
Mhm.
that was developed to help deal with some of the trafficking issues that we have. So we have some other local agencies that will house children like that. Really, in terms of group homes that have a contract with OJJ, Rutherford House is the one that remains.
Okay, those are low, what would you say, low violations, kids with mental
This is tricky, and the judges probably have opinions on this as well. I would have said years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, that Rutherford House, the idea of a group home, it's a non-secure group home setting, and normally it was meant for more moderate level offenses. The Office of Juvenile Justice has changed a little bit in the last couple of years. They're now putting relatively serious kids in these non-secure group homes. That's almost a separate discussion. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's their policy that we can't really change. So when a judge puts a child in state custody, this law says that OJJ gets to decide where they go. The judge simply says the child's in state custody. Whether or not they go home on probation, in a group home, or in a juvenile prison, that decision is made by the Office of Juvenile Justice. The judge can make a recommendation, but the decision is made by OJJ. So now these days, Commissioner, Rutherford House is holding some relatively serious kids. What I think OJJ is doing, and I don't mean to get too far into the weeds, they're trying to give kids a chance in this non-secure group home setting before they go to a juvenile prison. If they fail in that non-secure setting, they then go to juvenile prison, is the effort. But yeah, you might be surprised at some of the charges of the children at the Rutherford House.
Well, I worked at the Louisiana LTI, when it was LTI in Monroe, when I was in college. Sir. And so it's not on that level, because that's a juvenile, you consider that a juvenile prison.
Correct.
Well, it was a group, it was kind of a group home, but you had some offenders.
Secure beds.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Madam President.
Okay. One final question for you, Director Walker, and then I have one for Ms. Bryant or Dr. Wilson. I'm not sure if she's on.
She is, ma'am.
Thank you. How long do you expect to receive an answer from DCFS about the waiver?
Oh, to find out if we can do a partial?
Yes, sir.
I imagine that could be Monday. I think I'm just having a little trouble. Anyway, a woman that I know pretty well that works down there, Angie Baddo, is in charge of waivers. And I've got a call into her, and I imagine it'll be right after this Thanksgiving holiday. Okay. I need to ascertain two things: if we can do that partial, and then I also frankly don't know. I don't know if there's a window on these. I mean, so the idea of being grandfathered in 2013 was that you would ask for a waiver because they were making such a drastic change. I don't know now, 7 years later, if we can in fact ask for to be grandfathered in after the fact, so long past that time. Okay. So I'm checking on both of those things with Ms. Baddo, and I'll certainly let this whole subcommittee and certainly administration, Dr. Wilson and Ms. Bryant, know.
Yes. Okay. Because my thoughts is for us to reconvene as a committee and not take any action today. That would be my recommendation to the committee until we have further answers. And I just wanted to ask Mrs. Bryant just to give us, a briefing on what the cost would look like if we were to receive a waiver to be able to facilitate, I guess, 16, if we were to able to provide 16 extra beds.
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner, throughout this process, as we've talked about raise the age, the financial impact is a significant concern for the administration. Adding beds, no matter how many beds, cost us additional funds. If you look at the juvenile justice budget right now, juvenile services, we are currently experiencing a $4 million deficit. The commission is having to fund an additional $4 million from other sources in order to fund the current operations. So any increase in cost right now is difficult for us. To add 16 beds with or 16 additional is almost doubling the cost in my view. And so operationally, that would be difficult for us. And so adding beds is adding beds, regardless of how you do that. It comes with a cost. And right now, we don't have a mechanism to fund that cost.
Okay. So would it be safe to say that that would perhaps increase to an additional $2 million deficit, which would be about a $6 million deficit?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I'm just making sure. I don't see any other commissioners with their hands. Any other commissioners, any other comments?
No, thank you, Chairwoman.
Okay, I'm just going to ask that we reconvene. I see Commissioner John
I have a
Paul
question.
Young.
Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Commissioner. Director Walker, I wonder if you could tell us, so all the people, the kids in the detention center now, who are not there as 18 or 17-year-olds, the younger ones, are they all violent offenses that they're accused of, or are they there for more minor things? And is there some way that we could invest in increasing capacity at another facility where they could be held under like a lesser kind of surveillance?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, I mean, part of the issue is
like Johnny Gray Jones.
Right. Of the 14 children, 15 children that are not the adult charges, there's probably 3 or 4 that have lower level charges, but it's their behavior on probation. This is where the judges try to use detention for behavior modification, if you will. You give a child 48 hours of community service and they don't show. So now they have 96 hours of community service and they don't show. So then they end up getting 3 days in detention as punishment because they're not taking advantage of the community service punishment. You have to have some level of control and punishment if they're not responding to that. So we do have some of those kids pretty regularly. And really that's a question, frankly, I think that's more appropriate for the judges, because it's the judge's effort to control the behavior that they use detention for. I would say we have a child or 2 at any given time that possibly could go to Johnny Gray Jones. I'll give you an example. We have a girl that's been on runaway for several months. It's not a criminal, it's not a delinquency, it's only a runaway. But the issue is if you send her to Johnny Gray Jones, it's non-secure, she'll run again. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we'll hold that child for 2 or 3 days, almost more out of a safety. It's a protection for her life, that she's, she doesn't understand the danger she's putting herself in going on the run like that. So we do have a few kids that technically you probably could put to Johnny Gray Jones, but again, to some extent, out of respect for the judges, you'd have to understand what the judges are trying to use it for. Push came to shove, if 2 kids came in on armed robbery, yes, those lower level kids generally get pushed out. That's how we maintain population under 24. But when we've only got 12 kids in and they do have access to a few beds for some of the what we call sanctions beds, some punishment, they do use those. So the judges, to some extent, they just have that at their discretion if the beds are available. If just consider we have 2 delinquency judges, we have 24 beds, so essentially they have 12 beds to work with. Yes, sir.
If you have a situation like that where you say you have a runaway and you have minor offenses, when those things happen, are they assigned to counselors, or are they just taken back to the facility and left there? Are they being counseled during that same time?
Yes, absolutely. No, okay. All of these kids, I mean, and again, that's a question. This is really how probation and the judges work together. detention is a punishment meant to get the kids' attention. The treatment side, everything thereafter, counseling, tutoring, mentoring, positive reinforcement, all sorts of things. It's a mixture of that the judges use. You're going to use a little bit of punishment generally on the front end, and then a tremendous amount of treatment and counseling and whatnot after that. And so, yes, all of those children would have counselors, would have whatever program the judges can think of to help rehabilitate the child, we will put into effect, and we use. And I think also just to understand, there are dozens of children, unfortunately, that are on the run. The judges are using other options with all of those others. There's only one or two that'll be in detention because to some extent they've burned bridges and every other lesser restriction. The judges have tried several other things with those runaways, and it comes down to detention. So it's not that they go to it automatically. It's just that they're using at the end of a long road where they're trying to turn these kids around. And like I say, they've got the 12 beds each to work with. And if they have that bed available, they'll use it if they think it'll be effective. Sometimes it's not available to them if they're all full with violent charges. But that's how they have to manage the number of beds.
Thank you.
Can I follow up one?
John Paul Young, you still have the floor, Commissioner John Paul Young.
Thank you. Director Walker, can I ask one more question? So if it turns out that that in an increased number of cases, because we have trouble expanding the beds at detention center, there are fewer occasions when there are extra beds available for the judges to use for disciplinary purposes. Will there be kids who have nowhere at all to go, or will there be kids who are just in a situation in which they end up going somewhere that a judge thinks is not optimal but is still possible?
I think it's the latter. And again, I would welcome, I think, the conversation with the judges at that point, because it's their mindset, the judge's mindset that is appropriate there. Generally speaking, well, I guess in my 10 years, we've never had a child where we had nowhere to go with him. It is about what's optimal. And so there are times when the judge, if you don't have a detention bed and you don't want them to go home, where else can they go? Sometimes we have to find grandmothers, aunts, uncles, other family members, some other option. Sometimes you're going into foster care, DCFS, if it's a child abandonment situation. So the judges, I guess, frankly, that is the job, is trying to find the most appropriate placement that will help with rehabilitation. Sometimes that's detention for public safety. Other times it's a family member if public safety is not a concern. We always find a place, I guess, is the answer. What I try to do for the judges is supply as big a menu as we can. We try to find, like, helping to develop RCC, helping to develop the Brandon House. That we have a homeless home, the Jewel House for girls that are homeless. That's our job in probation, is trying to develop as many options for the judges so they have some good options to choose from.
So could the commission make investments in places like those to increase
Absolutely.
the menu without increasing the detention center at such a large cost? Do you think that would be helpful?
I think you could, and that is something that I think we've done before. That I believe, that's the creation essentially of RCC. That some of the funding,
if we
I believe,
invested something maybe to make Johnny Gray Jones have some secure places in it where we could put runaway kids.
No, I wish. No, unfortunately, the way the law worked on that, the reason Bossier shut down their juvenile detention center, among other reasons, you can't do both of those. You can't have secure and shelter in the same setting. It's not appropriate to have, they're saying, runaways with delinquent. There are limitations on that.
Sure,
but I'm with you in the general concept. Yes.
Yeah.
If you all, there could be resources that would probably cost less than additional detention beds,
right?
To help have other is simply finding the agencies to run it. You know, so RCC has come to us and it's been wonderful. The Jewel House is another. To find local nonprofits that are willing to do that is difficult.
Right. What is
But
what is RCC's capacity?
I believe 16 is the last time I looked at that.
And that's just for girls, is that right?
It's just for girls. It's also, I mean, just in my opinion, I mean, it's also, it's relatively expensive.
Okay.
And because it does, that's what it costs. I mean, you have to have the right staff there. You have to have the right medical options.
Is
You have to have,
it less expensive than detention?
it is.
Okay.
Detention is the most expensive. Yes. Detention is roughly $380 a day per bed.
Well, the thing that I would propose then is that we look at a list of the other places that provide detention-like services, some sort of housing with whatever amenities that it comes with, and try to see what investments we could make in those to expand their capacity, because it sounds like that might be faster and cheaper,
Right.
and maybe more humane in a lot of cases than detention. And there might be some middle ground between security that prevents people from running away and whatever it is that they have that allows people to run away that wouldn't run afoul of any law.
Yes, yes, and we'll continue to look. We definitely continue to ask Brandon House, any of the other, you know, do they have the capacity to expand to that? We are constantly looking for that. Like I say, we want to try to supply to the judges the best options that they might have available for the kids.
Great. Well, so just to follow up for next time, I wonder if the other commissioners would be interested in like examining a list of these nonprofits that we might make investments in.
Absolutely. I'm always for cultivating anything that is going to prevent additional incarceration. We're always open to alternatives to incarceration. And we do understand that we have to work with the challenges that the judges are facing. Those are all of the things that are on the table. I just believe that it's best for us at this time to just, you know, be ready to receive an educated answer from ECFS before making any decisions today. But all of those were very great questions, and I'm glad that you chimed in, Commissioner John Paul Young. Because those are things that we need to do to get involved, to get to the root of the issues.
Point of information, Madam Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Burrell, I'm going to get you to get on the board because Commissioner Jim Telefero has been waiting patiently.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, and does that conclude your comments, Commissioner John Paul Young?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Telefero.
Thank you, ma'am. Hey, Clay, just out of curiosity, how many kids are awaiting trial right now?
I'd have to look at that, Commissioner. I don't have it right in front of me, but I'd probably say maybe half of the children are. So it depends on, I mean, trial. They may be pending several different levels of the hearing. So some are pending continued custody, some appearance to answer, some trial, some sentencing. But probably half to 3/4 of the children awaiting that. We've got a handful of children, maybe 3 or 4 that are awaiting a motion to modify, which is they've been on probation. They've not been complying. And so we're doing a motion to possibly revoke their probation.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries. And so out of those people, out of those kids that are under our care and custody, I guess I'm very concerned about the average time that they're staying with us before even going to trial. What's the longest? I'm putting you on the spot. I'd like to know the average, but obviously that's a numbers thing, and you may not have it.
Juvenile is actually very fortunate in this way. By law, the Children's Code, which governs juvenile court, for lesser offenses, they must be tried if they are incarcerated. If they're in detention, they must be tried within 30 days. With more serious offenses, 60 days.
Okay.
So by and large, that does occur. There will be a handful, as you know, with your work. if the defense attorney, so it's the child's right to have that quick trial if they're
Sure.
incarcerated. If the child's defense attorney waives that and says that attorney needs more time to prepare her case for trial, then they can waive that. We'll have children that are there for longer, for 100 days, for 150 days, if they're awaiting serious offenses.
Okay.
By and large, most children are tried within 30 to 50 days in juvenile. So it's actually relatively quickly. It's only
Okay.
those adult cases where they're going to be a year or two, because as you know, the adult system it just takes a lot longer.
Okay, and I appreciate that. I just wanted clarification, and I asked the question for general knowledge for our fellow commissioners on the call.
Sure.
Also, this is my final question. I know that we have community-based initiatives to help our kids, and in your professional opinion, I know that we're always looking for something better. But in your professional opinion, and for me specifically, what's the most effective community-based initiative that we have to keep our kids out of lockup, basically? I mean, what seems to be working the best?
That's a big question.
Yeah, I mean,
well,
okay, the top three. I mean, and
you know,
you don't
so
have to say.
I would say the bottom line is in any program where the child, so you're going to have that punishment on the front end,
Sure.
because they need to respect the law and you know, right and wrong. But then on the back end, it's going to be programs that have a mentoring component. So if I can get you into a program, so for example, something like Bishop Sean Cooper has a program called School of Greatness.
Yeah.
You not only have the character building curriculum, but you have Bishop Cooper and his staff.
Okay.
You have mentors. It's kind of like, you know, if you're on a football team, you not only are learning football, but the coach and the staff that you look up to. So many of our kids, particularly young boys that don't have a father figure, find that father figure, a counselor, a teacher, a music director, a coach, someone like that. If it has that component, it's usually more effective.
Okay. Yeah, that's perfect. And I do appreciate that. And I do ask that again, since Commissioner John Paul, you know, brought up other programs, and Chairman Gage Watts, obviously, is in favor of that as well. That helps us. I think it helps me offer consideration for support on some of those initiatives, those community-based initiatives, where we get the most bang for our buck, so to speak. And that's all I have, and I do appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Roy Burrell. Commissioner Burrell.
Yes, Madam Chair. I just wanted to go back to something that Commissioner Young mentioned earlier as he was going through his deliberation on this. It just came to mind as I was listening to everyone about many of these youngsters. And as I said, you know, I've worked with juvenile detention at LTI in Monroe for a number of years. Is it too punitive for youngsters, and this is something that I've heard repeated about them running away? We had that problem there, but is it too punitive for those that you have that problem with, that you know that you have that problem with, to fit them with some sort of more comfortable ankle bracelet, or is that too criminal or psychologically criminal on those youngsters?
No,
Because
we have those.
okay, because it appears that you know, that's a thing that keeps running through what we were talking about, and it appears that something as simple as an ankle bracelet would give them some deterrence about doing it, because they can't take it off, and they know that they're going to be found if they go outside a certain realm. I think that's the way it works. But are we doing that, or is that something that we don't want to do?
Yes, sir. We absolutely are. As Commissioner Gage Watts was saying, as Chairperson Watts was saying, we definitely are. We have at any given time probably about 40 monitors on children right now. We have cell phone monitors and we have GPS monitors. Those are just different levels. To some extent, they require the child's compliance because you do have to charge them. And so if a child wants to not charge it and then try to run, they can. But that is basically what we're saying. But for that monitor, you will be in jail. So keep the monitor on and keep it charged. And by and large, we do get compliance with that. But it, like I say, it does have that weakness that they can not charge it and then try to run. So those runaway kids are sometimes some of the hardest kids to deal with. They're not a risk to public safety. They're a risk to themselves. And they're very just historically non-compliant. They're going to try to run. They're not going to charge them. They're going to cause us a lot of trouble. In fact, many jurisdictions around the country simply don't deal with that. They turn that back over more to the community, to the faith community. They don't deal with that in juvenile justice. We still try to wrestle with the problem because I think we are concerned about the children's safety when they run. But that's a tough area.
But
Because like I say,
if the issue is charging, seem like that should be something that could be set up on a routine in order to assure us that they are being charged. And it seemed like it would be less costly to do that than to leave it up to them. Because what I'm hearing you say is up to them to charge it. I don't do that on my telephone. I mean, on my Fitbit.
Well, it does have to be them, and you put an ankle monitor on the child, and then you can put certain restrictions about curfews and whatnot, and where they can go and where they can't go. But each evening they need to charge it. That is part of the probation, and the probation officer often goes by to make sure they're doing it. But they do need to maintain it charged. It'll show up on our computers if it's not charged, and that can be part of a violation if you're not charging it. But that's how we use those monitors. And like I say, we have a regular number of those on children as an alternative to detention.
Yeah, it seemed like a management issue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Burrell. I don't see any other commissioners with any other comments. And okay, I'm just making sure, I was just giving everyone a few minutes. And if not, I'm going to make a motion to reconvene after Monday.
Second.
Okay. And we'll set a date. Once we receive that, I'll get with Jeff and we'll set the agenda from there. And that was moved by the chair, and I think that was seconded by Commissioner Burrell. Do we need to do a roll call vote?
I think we can do an acclamation if there's no objection.
Any objection? That passes by acclamation. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Bye.
Bye, guys.